Hi, book besties. I just finished reading Spare by Prince Harry, and I gotta talk about it. I was not expecting to love this book, but I do. I read it while also listening to the audiobook, which Prince Harry narrates, and oh my goodness, so good. I absolutely love the way this book is written. They are very, very short chapters, maybe a page and a half, and then it's separated into 3 parts. And Prince Harry is such an engaging storyteller. When I was reading this, it felt like he was just talking to me over coffee or over a campfire, and I loved it. I will say, however, that the story is very, very sad. So the setup of this book is that he is in an argument with his father and his brother, and they pretend to not understand why he left the royal family. And so it goes to the story from the time that his mother passed until when he left the family, and he's explaining every instance that led to his leaving. And wow, chills. This book absolutely made me feel for Harry and his family. Less his family, more Harry. But one of these things is enough to make me crash out. And we have a whole book's worth of instances. I would be in jail. So I just applaud him, applaud Meghan for being able to do this the Duchess of Sussex, because what the heck? So this is the first autobiography that I've read, but it's definitely a good gateway one because now I'm like, I need to read them all. So definitely pick it up, but it is a really, really sad story, and my heart goes out to him. I can't believe that someone is actually living this life. But check it out, and I'll see you soon.
Hey fam, can I come to y'all a little crusty today? I'm gonna come to you a little bit crusty. So I just finished reading Spare by Cousin Harry, Prince Harry, Duke Harry, Harry of Sussex. Anyways, I just finished the book. This book is all the rave. It's all that's being talked about. As I told y'all before, I have a bookstore. So even before it came out, the book was pretty much a bestseller on pre-sale orders. So personally, I actually do not care about the British monarchy or any monarchy at all. It's never been something I'm interested in. I've never even watched The Crown. But I will say as a kid, I used to watch those tapes of Princess Diana from when she was meeting with her therapist. So I've always had heart for her. And then I watched the Meghan Harry documentary on Netflix, and I thought it was really interesting, particularly the episode where he was talking about how the public and how the press and even his family treated him after his mom died. That part. I'm a mom, so it really bothered me. So anyways, I read the book, and here are my thoughts. I'm going to keep it real quick and basic. Part 1 and 3 were really, really good. They kept my interest. They were page turners. Part 1, he's talking about his mother's death and his childhood without her, how he received the news of her dying. He talks about not even wanting to accept the fact that she had actually died for a really long time. And every single part of that was really good. It was written well, beautifully written. Part 2 for me was a little bit slow and repetitive. So it's about his military experience, why he was in the military, why he held that near and dear to him. But again, it was like the press messed this up for me. The press did that. The press kept me from being in love. The press kept me from being able to deploy or being able to safely deploy. And it was messed up. Okay, it really is messed up, but I felt like it could have been shorter. It didn't need to be as long as it did. I felt like the book probably could have shaved off 4 hours if part 2 was a little bit less repetitive. And then I think part 3 is what most people were tuning in for. Part 3 was mostly about his relationship with Meghan, how they fell in love, the things they worked through. And I'm not gonna lie, that part was probably the most interesting because it's all the rumors and things that were around. But also, they had some struggle love. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't know if I would want to marry somebody who I gotta struggle that hard with just to get to know. But Meghan, I guess she a rider, y'all, because she struggled with him, and I guess it paid off because he was willing to walk away for her as well and to protect her as well. But it's struggle love, it's hood love, you ask me. But anyways, would I recommend that you read Spare? Absolutely. I thought it was pretty good. It's 16 hours of your life, but I think you'll enjoy the story.
Now in the kind of second third of Spare by Prince Harry. And it's now talking about war. He's in Afghanistan. He wants to be there. it's something that he feels it's his duty to be. I think he enjoys being in the army, being a soldier. He talks about the kill count. And I remember when this was in the press and, they made him look so bad, but he's trying to say that, listen, I'm not embarrassed by the number. I'm not proud by the number, but this is the number of people I've, killed because this was my duty. This was my job. I'm a soldier. And, if those people I killed meant less Americans or less British soldiers died, then I have to feel that I did some good. He speaks about his girlfriends and again, the press issue. So many of his, war kind of tours were cut short because press found out where he was, which is awful for him because he wants to be there. I think that he is someone who needs a goal, something to do, as obviously in the royal family, you have to work. It's your duty. Public duty is your, service to the crown. And, the one funny, scene he talks about is when everyone's at Christmas dinner and they get the numbers of who worked where, and how many public kind of events that they did, and there's like a competition between, because we always talk about how Princess Anne does the most work, but maybe she's just the most competitive because she wants to have like the highest number at Christmas dinner. This is where work shy Will is starting, but even Harry does stick up for him by saying, well, hang on a second, William's just had kids. He's being a father right now. He also mentions how William has changed certain things when it comes to Kate, how he doesn't want her being treated like this parading like a horse when it comes to the press. So he's not giving that much access to her, which is interesting too. So there are changes that both of them are having because of the experience of what happened to their mother. We are starting to read more about the tension between the two brothers, how, oh my God, there's competition again. What's going on? Why can't we, I read that Harry wants to do a lot more stuff in Africa at this point in the book anyway. But no, Africa belongs to William, so he can't. So it's like, oh, I can't, But then I also, I see some aspects of the privilege that he's had when he starts in Victor's poem. He goes, yes, every Brit knows this. I'm like, they probably don't, unless you go to a very good school. And obviously he's gone to the best schools. He can go wherever he wants. He can go to Botswana for 4 months. This is privilege. He's surrounded by people who are in that elite class. And, you have to remember that when you're reading this, but obviously he's quite down to earth when he talks about things. When he goes on these royal tours, he's a lot more relatable, I think, compared to the other royal family, but he's still in this elite class. And we have to remember that. So now it's the final kind of third. And it's, there's a lovely photo that he's put with him, embracing and kissing Meghan. And it's called The Captain of My Soul. So I'm looking forward to reading this part now. But, he's been talking quite a lot about when is it my turn to fall in love, get married. And everyone just laughs at me. People have called me stupid all my life. And now, they just kind of don't consider me anything special because every time William has a child, I'm further down the line of succession. So instead of asking me, how do you feel about being an uncle again? They're asking, how do you feel about, going down the line of succession? He goes, why are you asking me that? So, I think it must be hard for him to find a role for himself. And if a role is husband, father, then that's something that's very important to him. So here we go to the last part.
Squatties, what happens when the man who lived inside the palace stops whispering and finally tells you what it was really like? That, Squatties, is why Spare hit differently. Because this wasn't some royal commentator sitting in a television studio pretending they know what happens behind those palace walls. It wasn't another newspaper columnist claiming they had the inside scoop. It was Prince Harry himself. The man was there. He grew up inside that world. He lived the rules. He experienced the pressure. He watched how the institution operated from the inside. And then one day, Harry basically said, right, you want to know what my life was really like? Let's talk. And boom, there goes the quiet little royal bubble. Suddenly, people weren't just looking at the polished photographs anymore. They were hearing about the human being behind them. That's what made Spare such a bombshell for so many people. Because when you look at the monarchy from the outside, everything can appear incredibly controlled. Perfect photographs, perfect clothes, perfect smiles, perfect ceremonies, everybody standing in exactly the right place. Somebody waves, somebody cuts a ribbon, everybody gets back in the car. Lovely. But Harry gave readers something completely different. He gave them his experience. And that's a huge difference, because regular people understand the power of hearing directly from somebody who was actually there. Think about it. If something happens at your workplace and you weren't there, everybody has an opinion. Yeah, I heard this happened. No, that's not what happened. My cousin knows somebody who works there. Apparently the manager said this. And you're sitting there thinking, can somebody please tell me what actually happened? Then the person who was standing in the room finally speaks. Now you've got the first-hand account. That's what Harry brought to the table. He wasn't claiming to be some perfect human being. He wasn't presenting himself as somebody who had never made mistakes. He was opening up his own memories, his own feelings, and his own experience of growing up in one of the most watched families on Earth. And that's why supporters connected with it, because behind all the titles, ceremonies, and palaces, there was a person, a son, a brother, a grandson, a husband, a father, and somebody trying to figure out his own life while the entire world was watching. That's something regular people can understand. Maybe you don't live in a palace. Most of us are not waking up thinking about royal protocol, but you know what pressure feels like. You know what family expectations feel like. You know what it's like when everybody has an opinion about your life. You know what it's like to lose somebody. You know what it's like to feel misunderstood. You know what it's like when people have already decided who you are before you've even opened your mouth. That's where Harry became relatable. The royal title makes his circumstances extraordinary, but the emotions, those are human. And that's why Spare wasn't simply interesting because Harry was a prince. It was interesting because Harry was finally speaking as Harry. And I think that's what rattled the establishment so much. For years, the public has been given carefully managed images of royal life. You see the smile, you see the wave, you see the carriage, you see the ceremony. But Harry opened the door and basically said, there's more to the story than the photograph. And once that happens, you can't unsee it. Because now when you look at those polished royal images, you know there's a human story underneath them. You start asking different questions. What's happening behind the smile? What does the person actually feel? What happens when the cameras disappear? And that's where Spare became so powerful. It wasn't Harry standing outside the institution throwing stones through the window. He had actually lived inside the house. He knew the rooms, he knew the rules, he knew the pressure, and eventually he decided that his own experience deserved to be heard. So when Harry tells his story, he's giving us something nobody else can provide, Harry's version of Harry's life. And Squatties, that is why I'm glad he wrote it. Because sometimes you have to stop letting everybody else explain you. Sometimes you have to pick up the microphone and say, actually, let me tell you what happened. And Harry did exactly that. He didn't leave his story in the hands of palace officials. He didn't hand his memories over to royal commentators. He didn't allow newspapers to be the only people interpreting his life. He put his own experiences on the page. Because for once, the conversation wasn't only about the prince people thought they knew. It was about the man saying, this is what it felt like to be me. And honestly, Squatties, after years of everybody else talking about Harry, I think Harry had every right to finally talk for himself.
Squaddies, imagine millions of strangers discussing your life every single day, while you're somehow the only person not allowed to explain it. That would drive anybody crazy. For years, newspapers, commentators, and royal experts constantly told the public what Harry supposedly thought, felt, and meant. Everybody had an opinion. Everybody had a theory. Everybody seemed to know Harry better than Harry knew himself. And eventually, Harry basically said, enough. Let me speak for myself. And honestly, why shouldn't he? That's what made Spare so important. Harry wasn't asking a commentator to explain his childhood. He wasn't waiting for another headline to tell people how he supposedly felt. He simply gave readers his experience, his memories, and his perspective. And Squaddies, regular people understand this. We've all had somebody tell a story about us and get half of it completely wrong. You hear somebody saying, oh, Miles did base because, and you're thinking, excuse me, I was actually there. That's exactly why telling your own story matters. Because when other people control the narrative long enough, their version can start becoming the truth in the public's mind.
Harry spent years watching his life become headlines, his childhood, his relationships, his decisions, his grief. Everything became something for other people to analyze. Then Spare arrived, and Harry basically said, "Here's my side." Harry was born a prince. He wasn't born a robot. He has feelings, he has memories, he has regrets, he has experiences that belong to him. And being born into a famous family doesn't mean you surrender your voice. In fact, when everybody else has a microphone, you probably need yours even more. Because stories change. One person says something, another repeats it, someone adds a little spice. Then suddenly the story has grown legs, bought a house, and started paying council tax. That's why first-hand accounts matter. Harry finally had the opportunity to say, "Don't just listen to what everyone else says about me, listen to me." And that's the heart of Spare. He wasn't demanding that everyone agree with him, he was refusing to disappear inside everybody else's version of his life. That's powerful. You don't need every critic to clap. You don't need everyone to say Harry was right. Sometimes you simply tell your story, put it on record, and let people decide for themselves. That's what Harry did. He took back the microphone. One thing is undeniable. Harry finally got to tell his story in Harry's own voice. He didn't owe the world permanent silence just because he was born royal. It was his life, his experience, and his story to tell.
Squaddies, here's the funny thing about Harry. The palace gave him a title, but the human stuff is what made people connect with him. Most of us will never know what it's like to be born a prince. Nobody's knocking on our door saying, "Sir, your carriage is waiting." But the emotions, we know those. Family pressure, feeling like the odd one out, losing someone you love, trying to figure out where you belong, trying to decide what kind of life you actually want. That's real life, and that's why Harry's story connected with people. Behind the title was a human being dealing with grief, family expectations, difficult emotions, and the pressure of figuring himself out. He didn't present himself as some perfect royal superhero who had everything under control. He showed vulnerability, confusion, anger, grief, and yes, moments where he was simply trying to understand his own family. Let's be honest, Squaddies, who hasn't sat there thinking, "What on earth is going on with my family?" That's why his story reaches beyond the royal world. Harry's circumstances are extraordinary, his emotions aren't. He was given labels from birth: prince, spare, soldier, royal, son, brother. But eventually he had to ask, who am I beyond all these labels? That's something millions of people understand. Maybe you felt like the black sheep. Maybe your family expected you to follow one path while you wanted another. Maybe you've had to start over. That's life. And Spare allowed readers to see Harry beyond the photographs, the uniform, and the royal wave. The person behind the prince. The crown made Harry famous, but the human story made people care. Because people don't connect with titles, they connect with people. And that's why supporters continue to see Harry as relatable. Not because his life is ordinary, it isn't, but because his feelings are human. He wants peace, he wants love, he wants his family to be okay. He wants to build a life that feels right for him. And Squaddies, don't we all understand that? That's why it's difficult to reduce him to simply the Spare. Behind the prince is a person. Behind the title is a son. Behind the headlines is a human being. And that's the Harry people connected with.
Squaddies, maybe the most powerful thing Harry inherited from Diana wasn't a title, a surname, or a place in the royal family. Maybe it was something much simpler: the ability to make people see the human being behind the royal label. And that's why Spare hits differently. Because when you think about Diana, one thing stands out. People felt like they could connect with her. She didn't always come across like somebody who was completely sealed off behind the royal walls. There was emotion, there was vulnerability, there was warmth. There was a sense that underneath all the protocol and ceremony was an actual person. And Harry has carried some of that same energy in his own way. Not because he's trying to become Diana, not because he's copying his mother, but because he seems to understand something she understood very well. People connect with people. Simple. You can have all the palaces in the world. You can have the medals, the titles, the fancy cars, the grand ceremonies, the crowns. But if the public never gets to see the human being underneath all that, the connection can disappear. That's where Harry is different. With Spare, he didn't present himself as some untouchable prince who had every answer. He opened up. He talked about his memories, his grief, his struggles, his family, his frustrations, his attempts to understand his own place in the world. And suddenly, people weren't just looking at Prince Harry. They were looking at Harry, the son, the brother, the husband, the father, the man who lost his mother far too young. And Squaddies, that is where I think the Diana connection becomes really powerful. Because Diana's strength wasn't simply that she was royal. Millions of people have had titles and positions. What made Diana memorable was her ability to make people feel something. She could walk into a room and somehow make the person standing in front of her feel seen. That's powerful. And Harry has his own version of that. He has spent years being watched. Now he's allowing people to watch him on his own terms. That's a massive difference. For years, other people could describe Harry. The press could describe Harry. Commentators could analyze Harry. Royal experts could tell us what Harry supposedly thought. And then Harry basically said, "Okay, let me tell you myself." And that is what makes Spare so important to supporters. It gave Harry something incredibly valuable, his own voice. Not the palace version, not the tabloid version, not the commentators' version, Harry's version. Now, does everybody have to agree with everything he says? Of course not. That's not the point. You can disagree with somebody and still acknowledge their right to speak about their own life. That's basic human decency. If I tell you what happened in my life, you might have a different opinion. Fine. But you weren't me. You weren't standing where I was standing. You didn't feel what I felt. You didn't live my memories. So why should somebody else automatically get the final word? That's what makes Harry's decision to speak so meaningful. And I think regular people understand that instinctively. We've all had moments where we thought, that's not my story. That's your version of my story. Somebody tells the family what happened, somebody else tells the friends, then another person adds a little seasoning. Before you know it, you've become the villain in a story you didn't even recognize. Harry knows what that feels like on a much bigger scale. His entire life has been public property in the eyes of the media. So Spare was Harry saying, I'm taking my story back. And that to me is where the Diana connection becomes meaningful. Not because Harry is trying to recreate his mother, but because there is something deeply human about refusing to hide behind a title. Diana showed people emotion. Harry has shown people emotion. Diana connected with ordinary people. Harry speaks about experiences ordinary people can understand. Diana showed that being royal doesn't mean you stop being human. Harry's story says the same thing in his own way. And that's why the book continues to matter to supporters, because years after all the arguments about it, the central thing hasn't changed. Harry spoke, Harry told his story, Harry allowed people to see the person underneath the institution. And that is something no palace statement can replace. No press release can manufacture it, no royal commentator can speak for him, no newspaper headline can completely erase it. Because once somebody has finally told you, this is what my life felt like from the inside, you've heard something that belongs to them. And that's why I think Spare will always be more than just a controversial royal book for Harry's supporters. It was a moment when the prince stopped being just a character in everybody else's story. He became the narrator of his own. And perhaps that's the strongest thing Harry shares with Diana. Not a title, not a wardrobe, not a royal role, but that ability to remind people behind every royal headline is a human being. And behind Prince Harry, there is simply Harry. And Squiddies, maybe that's the part the institution could never fully control. Because they could control the ceremonies, they could control the schedules, they could control the photographs, but they could never completely control his voice. And when Harry finally decided to use that voice, millions of people listened. That's why Spare mattered. That's why Harry was right to tell his story. And that's why, years later, people are still talking about the man behind the title. The prince gave us the book. Harry gave us his voice. And that is what people connected with. Thank you all for watching. I am your host, Miles. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Love you all, and goodbye.